Malden in 3 poems. Basements. Mr. Dunphy built a boat in his basement, where most men hide their tools, where some men run trains away from their children's hands. Mr. Cronin built a room in his basement, a chair, a reel-to-reel, and a fridge, and he'd sit back and sip and disappear. Mr. Cunha painted, not the basement, in his basement, ships and sails and seas, but he wouldn't disappear. He'd travel away from child number 6. Mr. Twohig flew planes from World War I, not in the basement, in the attic, so he could be closer to the sky. And these men were dragon slayers, oil burner tamers, the fiery centers of their homes. But Mr. Dunphy's boat was too big for the bulkhead. It took a flood to extinguish the flame and prove to the world and his wife that his boat would float. So he sat in it, admiring how it sat in the water, and he waited for the sad hour when the water would recede, the furnace would reignite, and the boat would lie useless, waiting to be torn apart for making way for smaller dreams. Dever Park. 1. The bandstand. A red brick bandstand stood in the center like a church for teens, where they took part in the adolescent sacraments of smoke, swears, and sex. Under the marble floor was a basement, where the bases, chalks, and rakes were kept. But any peek I ever got scared me into believing it was kind of a jail, where Eddie the Ump took unknowing little leaguers who ignored the warnings of their moms. 2. The circus. I stood in the clouds of fog holding on to my dad's hand, my head on his hip. My brother stood on the other side, hands in his pocket. Great trucks with painted monsters rendered flat and grotesque produced their own cloud as they rumbled onto the playing fields, and the pictures came to life. Elephants, hairier than the pictures in the library books, more like woolly mammoths, clomped down sagging gangplanks. Now tattooed men, cigarettes jammed into the corners of their cruel mouths, cursed, pushed, pulled the beast to their task. The big top flapped and flooded, and like a hot air balloon, filled and took shape. We 3 watched without words, my dad, my brother, and me, as if it were an ancient, sacred ritual, before my dad turned us around and we went home to our beds, to sleep the last hours of the morning, so the raising of the tent mixed with the last dreams of sleep. 3. St. Rocco's Day. The women wore their hair in giant beehives, and the men slicked their hair back so tight to their heads that little curls escaped in pubic twist in their sideburns and out the tops of their t-shirts. The saint's night was hot and humid. Every drop of moisture caught and combined with the grease of the sausages that sizzled in the half-drum, the great half-drums, alive with charcoal and fire, tended by the tattooed men, lit by the burst of flames as they mixed their sweat with the grease of their fare. 2 or 3 times an hour, the crowd exploded into a perfect circle in an instant ring where men, crazed with beer, beef, and heat, would beat each other's brains in. There were no sides or loyalties as men were pushed into the ring, then trapped by the crowd, so they responded with a fury of punches, kicks, clinches, finally to be decked from behind by the last man in, then pulled out of the circle, bloodied and beaten, so another fluid was added to the night's potion. It took fireworks to calm the crowd, or at least to turn their heads heavenward, long enough to forget to fight. St. Rocco's and fireworks. The finale rocked the neighborhood, bursting each water molecule in the air, raining the crowd with grease. Water. 1. Rain. When it rained in the city, my brother and I would race popsicle sticks in the gutters. We would race ahead, clearing away the leaves and twigs that impeded our ship's journey to the sewers. Even stranger was the kid who fished in the sewers, looking deadly serious, sure for a nibble on his line. Now this was the same kid who wore a football helmet all day if he saw a blue jay fly overhead, and he had a mother with orange hair and giant feet jammed into red high heels. 2. The res. Walk just up the hill across the parkway that weaves across the edges of town. A kidney-shaped reservoir 1/4 mile long, laced with trees, buttressed with cliffs of granite. Climb the 2 concrete balconies erected for city folk to view the splendors of nature. Ignore the scatological graffiti and the pornographic drawings. Step away from the rusting stolen bikes and shopping carts. Enjoy the blue water, sparkling in the late afternoon sun, cut into disappearing slices by the ducks that swim there. 3. The rink. 4 years old, balanced on blades, breathing in the cold that stabbed lungs like the cut of an icicle. Balance perfection, edges to ice, geometry and physics until my feet were red cold. My dad gently rubbed toes turned to glass, then hot chocolate and pizza slice. The top of my mouth burnt and sore for days, my tongue probing the tag of burnt flesh behind my front teeth. And I'd rush to see the Zamboni, a creature like any other except maybe the dawn elephants of another memory. Nana Riley. The voice was sweet but moved sideways like it was slipping on ice. It would slur, then trill like a bird, like a baby doll. It scared me, and Dad always knew. And I'd see the storm cross his brow. My mom would reach for the phone, and my dad would dip his shoulder and turn the phone from her. The crying of my mom faded like a pop song from behind the door. When they re-emerged, all things returned to normal, and she's my mom again. And I enter that room and smell her cigarette smoke and reach for the 3 photos of her when she was 5, 10, and 16. And wonder what a boy does when he has a beautiful mom who needs to be rescued from time to time. And why I fall in love with the person in each picture as if they never were the girl who grew up to be my mom. Trickers. My brother and I slide in the wooden booths and beg for nickels for the jukebox, while my dad chats with waitresses who deliver plates piled high with pasta, sauce, and meatballs. The tonic tastes better here, and so does the beer. We gnaw at the mighty crust to get to the tender white. He ran away when he was 14 in 1944 to join his older brother's army. He came home wondering if he was missed at all, and we gnaw at the mighty crust to get to the tender white. There's a picture of Dad and friends looking tough, wearing green jackets emblazoned with oversized shamrocks, all sporting pompadours, but only my dad's French-Canadian hair rising into a perfect wave over his forehead rivaled the masterpieces on the heads of Italian boys. And we gnaw at the mighty crust to get to the tender white. Hey, Paul, those are 2 good-looking kids you got there. They got their parents' good looks for sure, called out the waitress. So what does you want? Angela asked, keeping an eye on my dad, pushing an escape curl from her eye, craving a cigarette. And we gnaw at the mighty crust to get to the tender white.
Borrowed it. My son borrowed it, that's why it's there.
Yeah.
Sydney, so welcome to borrow it.
I think my wife really wants to see that.
Yeah.
Acadie. My daughter digs to claim the past for her papa and me. To know why we bow our heads, to know why we look heavenward. She shows us where the past were buried, the broken pottery, the tarnished and twisted spoon, the rusted flintlock that whisper the past, that claimed we lived here and were busy with that living when they sent us away, bound to return to reclaim our language, our farms, our wives, husband, and children, our God, Savior, and Mother, ourselves. You're walking on Acadian graves, my daughter said. So we walked on, looking straight ahead. Look up. In the tree an eagle's nest, so we looked heavenward. Here's where we dug, so we looked down. Up the steps and into the chapel like the stations of the cross we visited each painting, following the farmers to exile, the reds of coats and flames, the browns of soil and despair. We look to Mary, mistaken for Evangeline, but Mary for the bare right foot, Mary of the star on our flag. Below her, a list of names, and I found ours. We're included, we are named, we are Surette, we are Acadian. Nous sommes Surette, nous sommes Acadiens. We were not allowed to visit the expulsion cross. The girl said we would be risking our lives. It's not a name that steps lightly off the tongue. It more often trips among the crack of Irish, the music of Italian. It's the other side of the family. Farmers and fishermen. Uncle Joe the oil man and Uncle Clarence the rope maker. Dark and dull, homely and short, adults and children dressed in drab. But here, everyone is or has an uncle, an aunt, or grandmother who is. It marks each gravestone and mailbox. It's emblazoned on softball jerseys. It's Marie Babin's taken name, trying to outlive them all. Like my Nana, 100 years old this summer. But Marie Babin's still alive on the ghostly white tablet outside St. Joseph's Church. So I say it now a little more French. I say it without embarrassment. I say it like it has meaning as I cross the bridge over dangerous waters and drive the half moon of Surette's Island, Nova Scotia. Yeah, I'm Dave Surette, David R. Surette, if you're looking me up on the internet. The R is important. I grew up in Malden, Massachusetts, and I've been writing all my life, but poetry for the last 3 or 4 years. I have 3 chapbooks out. I've had 12 to 15 poems published around the country. I've been a school teacher for 18 years, 15 of those years in Waltham, and I'm on my 3rd year in East Bridgewater. My poems are mostly growing up in the city. Hockey, Catholicism in my family, but I traded the city 8 years ago to keep and raise horses. And this is my daughter's horse, Stanley, who's in training this year. Rebounds for Jack McCarthy. My great aunt Mabel claimed when she held me as an infant, I looked into her soul. Now I know gas can shape a newborn smile, but what kind of baby bellyache made me gaze into my great aunt's soul, for God's sakes? As a boy, I waited for the call, but heaven was silent. My mom blames it on girls, and the day Joanne Breen grew breast under her uniform's bib, knocked against my heart surely as hard as she could have tapped my shoulder. She had red hair, for God's sakes. Just last week, my high school English teacher told my dad that she, almost 30 years ago, looked right into me and knew I was special. My dad said, all I ever saw was the hockey stick. And I had nothing to say, because what does a guy say to that, for God's sakes? Now, I don't look into people's souls anymore. I gave that up in infancy. And I'm still one woman away from the priesthood, and no one has called me special lately. I see shadows in my peripheral vision like I used to see Matty Martin skated in late down the slot. I didn't look then, and I don't look now. It's enough to feather the pass and go to the net for the rebound. It's enough. It has to be enough, because I'm happy. Happy as this life allows. A child's burden. For the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. W.B. Yeats. Prologue. The tanks, 2 of them, twins, pyramids of petroleum, rose above Pearl Street Stadium. I was sure they would explode one day, sure of it. I was relieved when they emptied and only the steel beam stood in the sky, like a T-Rex in a museum, harmless. But they would refill, rearm, and the worry would restart, because I knew things explode. 1. We passed under the air raid shelter sign every day, reminders like the crucifix in each classroom. We knew to run there, like we knew the words Hiroshima and Nagasaki, sacrificed so my Uncle George could get home alive. Uncle George, the saddest man I ever knew, who never told war stories except once to my dad when they were deep in drink. We knew the whole world could explode. 2. My sister was the Christmas angel, skating, spinning, spiraling on the Prudential ice, under the great Christmas tree lit with oohs and ahs, my father telling me it was a gift from Halifax, Nova Scotia, a thank you to Boston for what it had done when the Mont Blanc drifted towards the harbor with 400,000 pounds of TNT. Whole cities could explode. 4. We were on our way to Belmont Hill for early morning practice when Dennis Murphy's dad told us the story of the great molasses flood, a 15-foot wave that rolled over Boston's North End, drowning everyone and everything in its sweet wake. We went to Mass in our hockey gear, and I prayed because whole neighborhoods could explode. Epilogue. I let the class listen all morning as the news grew darker and darker. It spun beyond understanding, and I wanted to say something about weeping. But I knew there were 2 of them, twins, towers of trade that rose above the city, and I added them to my list. Buildings explode. Forever and ever. She's somebody's mother. Actually, she's my children's mother. And they've seen her dance, not some 60s boogaloo, but hip shakes and belly rolls that knock out the power. And they've seen her ride, not some carnival pony, but her chestnut mare, her hair echoed in its tail. And they've seen her swing, not some wiffle bat in a backyard match, but the shaft of a hockey stick cracked on a junkyard dog's back who dared to chase her mare. They haven't seen it all. They never will. They missed her perched on the back of her seat as Topper launched a drumstick over Strummer's head. Tracking its course, she dove 3 rows, only to lose it in a scuffle, not caring I was no help at all. I hadn't seen it all. I'd already missed so much. I never touched her long blonde hair that flowed down her teenage back, hacked off months before our eyes met. The picture's a torment, and the foot-length lock she hides in her top drawer, a tease, a reminder not to miss anything. Ever. Ever. The pecking order. I make my way to the stable, buckets banging against my knee. Jane Knickers flirting. I'm tempted to feed her first. Chip speaks, pawing the ground. I flip the latch, he appears. White, blacks, browns, spot, splotch, and stripe. A child's drawing, an imaginary horse. Jane pushes her window open, white-faced, chestnut red, head shy. I put my hand on her neck. She relaxes. Dell in Chincoteague brown and white paint waits silently, wrinkles her nose, exhales. I pause and she emits a low rumbling. She has been mute for a year. Feral wisdom learned at her mother's side. Now it's a humble greeting, a blessing. And I stop to listen to them eat. It opens a window in my head. The tryout for Hannah. She sat the pinto pony whose tail was a tattered flag, whose coat was unshorn wool, who had bucked one off, bolted on another, backed up and balked. Her feet still, toes to the trees that lined the arena, hands the slant of a church roof. The rein squeezed, not tugged. Words softly cooed. She rose from the saddle, touched down, and rose again, like kisses on a child's forehead. The pinto pony lowered his head and tucked his chin, trotted on soft to the hands of the guest on his back, a guest welcomed on the stormiest of days.
We're finding new and great things to do with this edit system.
Easter. I hung a crucifix outside the pony's window. Ponies, horses live fragile lives. One day I found the crucifix a cross, Jesusless. He had pulled off the cross. He lay on a pile of hay and shavings that collect everywhere. The nails lost. I took the cross down and picked up Jesus. I felt his ribs, the cruel sharp elbows, knees, and the pinch of the crown of thorns. Back in the house, I searched for tiny nails to re-crucify Christ. I was glad when it was over and it was rehung on the stable. The horses, the pony, and me saved once again. Abby. You might find him elbows up to a bar in his native Connemara, or maybe at the Blackthorn at Easton, cap pulled to his brow. Quick with an opinion on politics and sports, quicker to doff his cap to a lady. Don't count the old guy out. Just watch Stephanie, with the leg and grace of her thoroughbred breeding, send over a pint for his favor. So why do we pull up a chair and join him? Why do we pretend he was ours? Why do we brag on how we knew him? Because he taught us we could do it when we barely could. Taught us that all rides aren't rough, and yes is an answer to some of our questions. We learned that snap at the step spoke of a proud past and a possible future. But there'd be no future. So, a glass to Round Robin's Royal Abbey. We knew him in life's fade, with a thick West of Ireland coat and a mane wild down his brow. We gave the vet the solemn nod and cried when they took him away. So, a glass in thanks and respect and in love. Surette off the horse. I was happy in my quiet day of desperation when the students revolted against literature. Mary asking, why can't we read something interesting like porn? And the poems I left on the kitchen table lay in the same place 8 hours later. Nobody taking the hint, caring to read them. I should have drawn the blinds, climbed under the puff, given the self-pity to sleep. But I climbed on the pony instead. Who needs to be trained to slow down? She goes 0 to 50 in about 10 seconds. So I sped her up and up to prove it was me in charge, who forced her fast and now forces her slow. Well, she burst beneath me, sent the saddle sideways and me on my head. The spring birds sang in autumn. And I was better, cured. Students rebelling against literature, what a surprise. And my wife came home and told me she snuck a read of my poems over breakfast and loved each one of them. And to the pony to whom I owe a debt, needs to be sped up in tiny increments, each seam sealed with calm, each step forward a grace. So, when you feel trapped in that desperate life, no matter how quiet, climb on the wild pony's back and ask for speed, and she'll drop you on your head. And in that post-concussive state, see how the world spins around you, with and without you, until you can find a place to jump on. Two pictures, one to hang up, one not for Dr. Amy Hurd. One, the vet sedated the pony mare whose head bobbed on the edge of consciousness. She snapped on a latex glove and pulled on a sheet of plastic to her elbow, dipped her hand in petroleum jelly and reached into the mare up to her elbow. concentrated face, questions answered at the tip of her finger, diagnosis and obstruction. She drew her hand out, rendering the sheath inside out, filled a pail with mineral water and electrolytes, snaked a tube through the mare's nose to her stomach, and pumped until the pail was empty. It may take an hour, a day, a week, it may not work at all. I walked her for 12 hours through the night till noon, and she passed it. A shiny lump of manure, and I sighed and slept. 2. I sat under the 3/4 moon that hung on the pony mare's shoulder, her mane a halo, her eyes holy water. She woke, her eyes cleared, and we walked around the bench like monks in meditation, to the pond and the paddock, to the apple tree and back. 4 trips, then rest, then again. And I imagined the others disappearing. First the black to his one white sock, then the chestnut down to her white face, the Appaloosa, his spots first, down to his white. And then they were gone. I mean really gone. Up the hill, through the fences, into the sky, disappear. Like horses in an Indian myth, I swear, I scanned the fence lines, the tree, the stable doors, gone. But back with the rising sun, recharged, ready for men to lead, ride, saddle, kick, feed, shout, grind them down to skin and sinew, longing for the night. But I had held one back. I had held one all night. One of us the kite, one of us the string, and I felt the moon's tug, the water's healing, the night animal calls, the void left by the escaping equines. Humility. My mother buys my books and gives them to her friends, who buy more and give them to their children. My daughter says my books are the unwanted gift. It's a Christmas fruitcake.